Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive, or maybe I should say we're distilling the data, on Brown-Forman. They're a 150-year-old spirits giant currently navigating a pretty potent mix of modern challenges. If you've ever poured a glass of Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, or Herradura, you already know their work. But here's the thing you might be wondering. How on earth does a brand with a century and a half of history survive prohibition, outlast crazy inflation, and somehow still manage to pivot when modern tastes shift so rapidly? Let's explore exactly how this deeply rooted, slow-aging oak tree of a company plans to weather the fast-paced storms of our modern economy. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1. The Brown-Forman legacy, 2. Navigating modern market pressures, 3. The competitive spirit, 4. Brown-Forman secret sauce, and 5. Pouring the future strategy. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the Brown-Forman legacy. You really can't grasp where this company is headed without first looking at its incredible endurance. I mean, they are the definition of multi-generational thinking. Founded way back in 1890 by George Brown and his accountant George Foreman, this company actually survived the 1920s prohibition. How? By being one of only 6 groups allowed to produce medicinal whiskey. Wild, right? Fast forward to 1956, and they made the massive, pivotal acquisition of Jack Daniel's. The 2000s brought huge global expansion into other spirits like vodka and tequila, and by 2022, they were successfully launching canned cocktails with Coca-Cola. It really shows how they survived and evolved to reach over 170 countries today. Moving right along to Section 2, Navigating Modern Market Pressures. Let's zoom out a bit. Analysts love using a pestle framework to map out the external environment, basically looking at the political, economic, and sociocultural forces hitting an industry. And right now, Brown-Forman is facing a very potent mix of challenges. Politically, they're dealing with hard macroeconomic realities like reciprocal tariffs and trade policy changes in key markets like Canada and Europe. Economically, persistent inflation and higher input costs are squeezing them. We're literally talking about the cost of labor and the actual wooden barrels used for aging getting more expensive. And socioculturally, they have to navigate changing consumer drinking habits, like the rising sober-curious movement, and an overall shift toward health consciousness. So it all boils down to how they balance these very real threats with some emerging high-value opportunities. Yes, inflation and the sober-curious movement are definitely threatening overall sales volume, but there is a massive silver lining here: premiumization. Consumers are actively trading up. They might be drinking a little less, sure, but they are absolutely willing to pay more for high-quality, premium experiences and the incredible convenience of ready-to-drink cocktail formats. Now for Section 3, the competitive spirit. Let's head to the industry battlefield and decode Porter's 5 forces to see what drives the intense competition they face every single day. Why is everyone fighting so hard here? Well, the U.S. distilleries industry has an enticing profit potential of $2.1 billion, with an impressive 11.1% margin. A market this lucrative naturally draws fierce rivals into a landscape where the top 4 firms account for less than a quarter of total industry revenue. It's wide open. Stepping through these forces, we see that while astronomical startup costs keep the threat of brand new entrants pretty low, and supplier power is minimal because basic ingredients are abundant, the real squeeze comes from the market itself. The power of consumers is exceptionally high. Buyers face basically zero switching costs, and they demand constant novelty, which forces companies to spend an absolute fortune on branding. Add in substitutes like craft breweries and wineries, and you get an intense, hyper-competitive rivalry among existing brands fighting tooth and nail for limited shelf space.
Which brings us to Section 4, Brown-Forman's secret sauce.
With such intense rivalry and heavy pressure from consumers, how do they actually stay on top? To figure this out, analysts use the VRIO framework to identify a sustainable competitive advantage. Basically, what are the things competitors simply cannot replicate overnight? For Brown-Forman, it's their 150-year heritage, their immense brand equity, and a highly unique family ownership structure. Being publicly traded but family-controlled is huge. It means they aren't forced to sacrifice their long-term brand health just to satisfy Wall Street with short-term quarterly profits. And that multi-generational advantage is anchored perfectly by their guiding mission statement: nothing better in the market. It reflects this unwavering commitment to premium quality. They really view themselves as stewards of legacy brands, making sure that what they build today is sturdy enough to pass on to the next generation. And finally, Section 5, pouring the future strategy. So, how does this legacy strategy actually pour into their financial performance and their master plan for the years ahead? Well, to be totally honest, it hasn't been entirely smooth sailing lately. Despite having incredibly strong brand equity, fiscal year 2025 was tough. They experienced a 5% decrease in net sales, pulling revenue down to about $4 billion. This drop was largely driven by lower discretionary spending from consumers, negative foreign exchange rates, and a purposeful distribution transition that caused some planned short-term hiccups. Looking at the recent revenue volatility across the entire spirits industry, you can really see the roller coaster Brown-Forman and its peers have been on. But amidst all of this volatility, it's vital to note that Brown-Forman's premium labels, specifically Woodford Reserve and their newly acquired Diplomático Rum, remain incredibly strong, reliable growth drivers for the company. Now, tracking how their stock has navigated these choppy waters compared to broader market indexes over the last 5 years definitely reveals some real headwinds. It's been a challenge. Yet, management frames this period, which includes some serious cost-saving restructuring, like a recent 12% workforce reduction, as laying the critical, necessary groundwork for sustainable, long-term growth. So, what is the game plan to bounce back? To secure their top shelf status, their strategy relies heavily on expanding highly popular ready-to-drink options to capture that convenience market. Think canned Jack and Coke. They're also leaning even harder into premiumization with innovations like making Woodford Reserve Double Oaked a permanent product. On top of that, they're cultivating deep global brand communities to foster intense loyalty and doubling down on environmental, social, and governance goals, particularly when it comes to sustainable packaging. As they barrel up and age their whiskey for the next decade, we are left with a pretty massive question. Can this storied 150-year-old giant adapt fast enough for the modern consumer? Will their multi-generational commitment to premiumization keep them securely on the top shelf? Or will rapidly shifting modern tastes leave them on the rocks? That's definitely something to ponder the next time you see that iconic square bottle on the shelf. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a much clearer lens on the spirits industry.